Jehovah's Witnesses released a video recently titled, "What is God's Name?" I've talked about this subject before, but it's been a long time. Having grown up as a Jehovah's Witness and subsequently left the group, I've kind of made a hobby out of pointing out all the things they get wrong. So let's take a look at this video and see what this group of people who claim to be God's mouthpieces on earth have to say about God's name. Let's get into it.
Does God have a name? The Bible mentions the names of many gods. The nations surrounding ancient Israel worshipped deities named Ashtoreth, Baal, and Molech. The first-century Christians lived among people who worshipped such deities as Artemis, Hermes, and Zeus, and the names of those gods are recorded in the Bible.
Interestingly, the Bible does mention lots of gods. At the end there, they mentioned Artemis, Hermes, and Zeus. Those are gods from the Greek pantheon. A pantheon is a group of gods or particularly respected or important individuals worshipped by a set of people. So the Greek pantheon included Hera, the goddess of marriage, mothers, and families, Poseidon, the god of the sea, Hades, the god of the underworld, Zeus, the god of the sky, and others. Well, guess what? The Greeks weren't the only ones with a pantheon. This is where it gets wild. You remember the Canaanites from the Bible, right? Canaan was the area that, according to the Bible, might have included parts of modern-day Israel. And the Canaanites were supposedly descendants of Canaan, son of Ham, who was the grandson of Noah. You have to take everything the Bible says with a grain of salt because it isn't historically reliable at all. The Noah story itself is nonsense anyways, but the Canaanites were real people, and they had a pantheon too, just like the Greeks. Ready to hear the names of some of their gods? It'll knock your socks off. I hope. If it doesn't, just take them off and let me pretend it worked. There was Yahweh, the god of metallurgists. There was also El, who was the supreme god. He created all other gods, and collectively, the gods he created made up the Elohim. Moloch was another Canaanite god. It's usually the one that people made sacrifices to in the Hebrew Bible.
The nations surrounding ancient Israel worshipped deities named Ashtoreth, Baal, and Molech.
Yeah, those are the ones. They're talking about the Canaanites. What they failed to mention is that they also worshipped Yahweh, god of metallurgy. The Bible actually mentions a ton of Canaanite gods in different contexts, but since you don't recognize all their names, you don't really realize that it's referring to the Canaanite pantheon. It isn't really referring to the Canaanite pantheon, actually. It lists some of these gods as angels or people in a story or whatever, and completely glosses over the fact that they were considered gods in a neighboring culture. Yahweh wasn't even that high up in the hierarchy of gods. And then the Israelites come along and supposedly make a covenant with Yahweh. They say Yahweh will protect them and make them his people as long as they don't worship any of the other gods. I guess he wanted supremacy. Ever think it was kind of weird how God was obsessed with making sure nobody was worshipping other gods when supposedly no other gods existed in the first place? The Israelites knew there were other gods. That's why basically everything they said was framed around it. Ever wonder why the Bible lists multiple different names for Yahweh, like Elohim? There's your answer. It was referring to the Canaanite pantheon. When I found that out, it blew my mind. We're only 20 seconds into this Jehovah's Witness video and I'm already off on a tangent. Let's keep watching.
The Bible acknowledges that there are many gods, but the name of one God appears in ancient manuscripts of the Bible far more times than the names of all the other gods combined. If you read modern Bibles, you will still find the names of the other gods. However, many Bibles have removed the name of the most frequently mentioned God. The name of that God appears some 7,000 times in the oldest versions of the Bible. Who is the God whose name has been removed from the Bible?
What we're looking at here is called the Tetragrammaton. They're making it out to be some big conspiracy that the Tetragrammaton doesn't appear as often as other gods' names. Jehovah's Witnesses truly are conspiracy theorists in their hearts. The real answer is because Jews started translating it to Lord in Greek translations in the first few centuries BCE. After Christianity really gained a foothold in the first few centuries CE, those were the translations they were using. So basically the answer is historical reasons. Eventually more and more original manuscripts were recovered, and people knew where the Tetragrammaton belonged and where the word Lord belonged. But there's still some question about it because we don't have all the original manuscripts. They didn't use vowels in the ancient Hebrew language, and it's read from right to left instead of left to right. So the letters we're looking at here, directly translated, are YHWH. Eventually, people decided to add vowels to Hebrew, but they already had a bunch of writings, so they decided to notate vowels with a set of dots and scribbles that could be added in without altering the original texts. It looks like this. Well, there was a superstition about pronouncing the name Yahweh. Since they chose the god of metallurgy as their main man, if you will, they thought it was like bad luck or something to say the name out loud. But they had this tradition of reading this stuff out loud in front of their congregation. So to prevent people from saying the name out loud, they added in vowels from a word that would make it completely absurd. They wanted the name to be unpronounceable, so when people came to it, they wouldn't even try. So they added the vowels for the word Adonai, which translates to my Lord. When you combine the letters YHWH, the Tetragrammaton, with the vowels from the word Adonai, you get Yehovah. This is important. We'll come back to it in a minute. Before we continue, I wanted to mention something. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, there's Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Etsy shop. I just put these aluminum warning signs up for sale. If you want to keep Jehovah's Witnesses away, put one of these up. Or make $150, whichever. Warning, religious evangelists, $150 fee due immediately. Cash only, soul-saving messages not accepted. So if you want to keep all religious evangelists away, get one of these. There's a link in the description and the pinned comment if you want to take a look. Anyways, back to Jehovah's Witnesses.
The first part of the Bible, often called the Old Testament, was written in Hebrew and a related language, Aramaic. In Hebrew, God's name is represented by 4 letters. Hebrew is read from right to left. In English, those 4 letters are rendered by the consonants Y, H, W, H. The original vowel sounds used in God's name are unknown, but the 4 letters representing God's name appeared throughout ancient Bible manuscripts and have been inscribed in many other locations.
Wow, interesting. They got some things right and they got some things wrong. Basically, everything was correct up until they said we don't know how it was supposed to be pronounced. That's a cop-out. Jehovah's Witnesses are specifically invested in the pronunciation being that combination of Adonai and Yahweh. As I said, ancient Jews did that intentionally to make it absurd and unpronounceable. And eventually, they just took the Tetragrammaton out completely and put in the word Adonai, or my Lord. That's how Lord got replaced with God's name in so many places in the Bible. Not many, but some modern scholars are capable of reading ancient Hebrew fluently, as well as the ancient Hebrews who wrote it could. According to those scholars, the most plausible, fluent, and likely pronunciation is Yahweh. The vowels that belong in the word are A and E. Adding the vowels for Adonai is absurd. But as I said, Jehovah's Witnesses need the name to be pronounced Yehovah. When the Hebrews added the vowels from the word Adonai in, the name actually started to catch on and spread through different areas. When it spread through Germanic regions, the accent they had changed Y sounds to be pronounced as J's and W sounds to be pronounced as V's. In reality, J's didn't exist until the 1500s. Up to that point, the letter and sound for J was interchangeable with the letter I, which is how the name IEHOVA ended up in the earliest copies of the King James Bible. Up to that point, there were a ton of different Bible translations being used, including but not limited to the Paris Bible, copied in the 13th century. And all the way up to that point, people were inserting the word Lord in place of the Tetragrammaton. Eventually, when King James did his famous translation, he inserted what he believed to be God's name in a few places, most notably Psalms 83:18. It turned out to be a phonetic pronunciation of the name Yehovah, the bastardization of Yahweh combined with Adonai, from the Germanic region, which led to the pronunciation Jehovah. As I said, J's didn't exist until the 1500s, so I'm really not sure why Jehovah's Witnesses used the name Jehovah in the first place. They should be using Yahweh, and while they're at it, they should switch to Jesus' actual biblical name, Yeshua. Strangely though, they use the fact that Jesus is the most common name for him as a reason to use the name Jehovah too. His real name was Yeshua, but we call him Jesus, so we should use the name Jehovah too. It's an English translation. Not really. We use all kinds of Hebrew names in modern English and don't bat an eye. Elizabeth is a Hebrew name, but we don't replace it with some English translation. Hannah is a Hebrew name too, you and Sarah. Besides, this is the name of God. Do you really want to alter it? Jehovah's Witnesses have this weird obsession with saying God's name to keep yourself safe. When I was a little kid, I was afraid of the dark, as most kids are. When I told my mom, she said, "Oh yeah, there are monsters in there. Actually, they're demons. But if you say the name Jehovah, they can't hurt you." They have this bizarre belief that the name Jehovah has supernatural powers to protect you. So being the 6-year-old that I was, I would wander through the house saying Jehovah, 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 not realizing I was just speaking a made-up word that had no power at all. Let's keep watching the video.
In English, a popular rendering of God's name is Jehovah. Another rendering is Yahweh. Some Bibles use one of these forms of God's name at Psalm 83, verse 18, and in several other places. A number of other translations, such as the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, restore God's name to the locations in which it originally appeared. Since God had his personal name included in the Bible some 7,000 times, he no doubt wants us to know and use that name.
Basically, they're saying they tried to insert the Tetragrammaton back into its original locations in the Bible. That's fair, I guess. It was legitimately removed from a lot of places over that superstition about speaking God's name. But one big problem with that is the fact that we don't really know exactly where it appeared. We don't have the originals for everything. I don't know this for a fact, but I have to assume Jehovah's Witnesses just guessed at some of the appearances. I've done deep dives into their translation of the Bible, which is the New World Translation, and they have actually changed words to be slightly different in an effort to support their already existing theological beliefs. You can look up an interlinear version of the Bible online and compare the words to each other to see if they were honest in their translation or not. I found a few places where they've straight up changed the meaning of a sentence by switching out words because they believe the Bible's trying to communicate this one specific message because God told it to them in a dream or something. So instead of keeping the Bible true to its original meaning, they switched the words out to represent what God told them it meant. The New World Translation is honestly complete trash as far as Bible translations go. Not to mention the fact that we have no idea who translated it in the first place. When you do a massive translation effort like that, you usually have scholars listed with their credentials and everything. As far as I know, the only credit they give is translated by Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's keep watching.
A man can have many titles: husband, father, architect, and a personal name such as John. In the same way, God has many appropriate titles: Almighty, Creator, and Lord. He also has a unique name, one not shared by any other God. That name is Jehovah.
No, it's Yahweh. I love how they go through some of the history of this stuff, even mentioning gods from the Canaanite pantheon. They went through the history of the Tetragrammaton and talked about how it's read from right to left and everything. But conveniently, they just leave out the important parts. Why do they do that? You can't tell me after all the research they did on this subject, they haven't read about that. The information I have about the pantheon is really easy to access. It's all over the place. The information I have about the history of the Tetragrammaton, how it moved through Germanic regions and got combined with the vowels for the word Adonai, I got that from Bart Ehrman's blog. Dude is a world-renowned Bible scholar. He knows what he's talking about, and he comes with citations. So if you want to read more about it, check out the article about God's real name on his blog. It's behind a paywall, but it's an interesting read.
You may wonder, what is God like? Does Jehovah care about us? How can we draw closer to God?
Well, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, if you want to know more about God, Jehovah's Witnesses are the last people you'd want to talk to. They are correct about some things. For example, they don't believe in the Trinity. That's correct. The Bible doesn't support the Trinity. Monks went in and retroactively changed the wording in the Bible to make it seem like the idea for the Trinity had biblical support. It does not. They're correct about a few little things like that. And when you go home and look that stuff up, you start to wonder how much other stuff they're correct about. They lend credibility to their other absurd ideas by being correct about a few mostly inconsequential ones. Don't fall for it. They have some very strange, unfounded beliefs about the Bible. And if you don't buy into each one, if you don't accept it without question, they will throw you out like a piece of garbage. They practice shunning, and believe me, from personal experience, you don't want anything to do with a group that does that. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Thanks for watching, guys.